well, thank you so much. This is The Next Right Thing. I am Debbie Georgianni with Adam Blai. We are the co-hosts of The Spirit World, heard right here on the Guadalupe Radio Network on Saturdays, 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern, heard across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. And today we're talking about, Adam, walking the walk, talking the talk, being authentic Christians. Ooh, this is a big topic. Not a lot of time to cover it, but why don't you take a stab at it, Adam?
Well, Deb, we wanted to talk about this today, partly because we talked about some areas on the last The Spirit World that got a lot of reactions from people, and the biggest one seemed to be, when we talked about authenticity and living a double life, which so many people do. So part of the struggle with living a good Christian life, a good Catholic Christian life, is we tend to compartmentalize the areas of our life that we're not doing so well in. Maybe there's some areas of sin that we keep falling to, and we've kind of given up on fighting it, and we just kind of say, well, I'm going to give myself some excuse why this is okay, and maybe I deserve to be able to do this because I work so hard, or maybe I've had a hard life and God understands, and I'm just going to do this thing over here. The danger, Deb, is that a couple things happen. One, you tend to live a false life to the people around you, particularly the people close to you, where you often pretend that this isn't going on. And then secondly, and really harmful to yourself, is you can start lying to yourself and kind of convincing yourself that it doesn't really count, or what I'm doing really isn't so bad. It doesn't really rise to that level, and we can think of different common sins like people turning to pornography or other sexual sins, that type of thing, that are really common, or drugs and alcohol. The authenticity means that your whole life is lived in a Christian way. Your whole life is not compartmentalized. It's one. And that is a struggle, but it's not just a struggle. It's what's helpful, because if you go to confession and you put on a shelf in a box your secret sins that you don't tell the priest about, and then you tell him everything else and you get absolved, well, you're not absolved of those sins that you're aware of, particularly if they're mortal sins, right? We've talked before how venial sins are taken care of during the Mass. Mortal sins are not. And if you got mortal sins that you're hiding from the priest and kind of hiding from yourself because you're not going to stop them and you have no intention of trying, that's doing a lot of harm to you. And it's harming you spiritually, particularly if you're being inauthentic and receiving communion in spite of your hidden life, your hidden sins. And then it's going to affect your family, your friends eventually. Your idea of yourself is going to be very different than maybe what other people see. Other people may see the sins in your life and the effect that they have on your life, and you're kind of in denial about it. You're pretending that they don't exist. And I see this, Deb, partly because, in my work in psychology, I spent a number of years working in prisons with people that had done crimes, and they almost universally convinced themselves that they're justified, that what they did is okay in a sense, that it was required, or, like I said, was justified by the circumstances, that they were the right thing to do under the circumstances. And it does a lot of harm to the person. And the big first step in making progress in therapy with any of these crimes is acknowledging the fact that you chose to do it, you knew it was wrong, you chose to do it anyway, and you're responsible. The number one thing is you're responsible. Mm-hmm. We convince ourselves it's somebody else's fault.
Right.
Other people were mean to me. Somebody made me do it. Mm-hmm. We shirk the responsibility. And so on a basic human level, authenticity is about being honest with yourself about who you are, and being honest with your family, your friends, and your priest in confession. And ultimately Jesus sees you in truth, regardless. You can't deceive him. You can't hide anything from him. So authenticity is not easy, but it leads to conversion, because if you can see yourself truthfully, it leads to change, because you're going to want to change.
And just to give some hope to everybody that's listening, I think it's just natural for people to struggle with things they're ashamed of or things that they're embarrassed about. And that's why when you hear priests will say, I've heard every single confession, every single sin. Nothing's going to shock me. We're not fooling God. We're all on this human experience journey together, and we're encountering all these things. But I think the worst thing that people can do is hide and pull back from forgiveness and from healing and from recovery, because all that's doing is keeping you locked in that cave, that prison, and you're just swirling in it, and it's not going to be helpful for yourself first, for your soul, and for all the people around you that are going to be affected by this. And so that's why it's important for people to take those, like in the 12-step program, Adam, take accountability and move forward and baby step it. But we said this on the spirit world, Adam, and maybe it's a good time to say it again. When we take those first baby steps towards God and admit our faults and our limitations and our weaknesses, God comes rushing to us with help, support, grace, blessings, all of the above. So it's important for us to take those steps. If we just keep saying, well, this is my life and I'm stuck with this, or this is the cards that I was dealt, and this is the birth family I was born into, and blah, 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 and all this kind of things that we can all say, it's going to keep us locked in this prison. And that's not what God wants. Jesus said clearly, Adam, I came for you to have life and to have it to the full. That means abundance. That means experiencing life in its best way with a freedom so that you can live your just ultimate spiritual life here. And that's important. And people can start today if they would just be honest with themselves. I love how you said that, Adam. And I think if we tap into that, that would be important.
Yeah, so being honest with yourself often involves accepting objective truth, meaning that there are rules that God has laid out for our benefit, not to be mean and limit our fun in life, but rules that help us have harmonious families and communities and harmony within ourselves and peace within ourselves. And as you say, life abundantly. To accept God's laws because they're there to help us and put guide rails on life that keep us in the healthy areas. If we accept objective truth and then obey it, we will be free of these self-delusions that we create to justify our sins and keep us wallowing in sin. Because part of the trap that you mentioned is, even though I'm kind of rationalizing it and convincing myself that it's okay, part of me knows that it's wrong, and part of me is ashamed. And if I'm ashamed and I know God sees me in truth, I'm probably going to stop praying. I'm going to shy away from the Mass. I'm going to certainly shy away from confession if I feel helpless to stop my sin or I don't want to. And if I stop praying and shy away from the sacraments, I'm turning away from all these graces. And so it compounds itself. And then you start feeling ashamed of the fact that you've turned away from these graces, and you start building a new worldview without God that is very distorted, particularly if you had access to the sacraments, the Catholic sacraments before, and you drift away and you turn away and then try to build a worldview and a philosophy without the sacraments and God, where you've justified these things. You can end up in a very bitter and twisted place. So it's just so important to see yourself in truth. That truth is the objective truth of Jesus and his words and his commandments. The foremost, of course, he said, was love one another as I have loved you, which cuts through so many sins and destroys the rationalizations around them. If we think of how we would want to be treated by somebody else, how would we want to experience love from other people? And is that how I'm treating them? It brings clarity, I think, to some extent. And then, of course, the Ten Commandments are critical. The solution, and maybe we'll talk about this more after the break, but I think the solution is twofold. One is to go to Jesus, and if you are ashamed or you're confused and you're not sure if what you're doing is truly sinful, you're buying your own lies and rationalizations. Tell him, I'm buying these lies and rationalizations, but part of me is telling me this isn't right. Or I'm ashamed and I haven't come to you in the Mass or confession because I feel helpless to stop. Go to him and be honest with where you're at. As you said, he's going to come rushing for you and towards you, and give you the additional grace to start healing.
And baby step it. You're not, sometimes, quitting things cold turkey, that doesn't always work for everybody, and so to baby step your way out of it, create that plan, and you know yourself the best. I mean, and ask your guardian angel to help you with this. Meditate on Psalm 91, God's protection. It's right in the middle of the psalm about how the angels are very active in our spiritual lives. So you have that support. Just take the first step. So we're going to hold it there, Adam, send it back to Keith for some important announcements on Morning Joy. And then on this last segment, let's talk really the practical steps of walking the walk, talking the talk, recognizing when we're coming up against people that are really not true and authentic, and what do we do about that? Because I think it's important that we also start to somewhat distance ourselves if we're going to be influenced by people like that. We have to be careful who we surround ourselves with. Adam, we can surround ourselves with people that reinforce those lies. The company that we keep can shape the way we think about things and how we justify things. We have to be discerning and careful who we choose to spend our time with. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's of course a truism, right? You are the company that you keep, that old phrase. It certainly impacts you. We tend to gather or come together and spend time with people that have adopted, a similar philosophy, a similar justification for either selfishness, for sin, for cruelty, for exploitation, whatever that disordered life is. We tend to come together with other people that buy into the same, whatever the same lie is that justifies those things. And here's the thing, Deb, that's tricky about it, is it's often unconscious. It's not like we think, oh, I need to find somebody that agrees with me that, drinking to excess isn't a problem and it's just my choice and it's not hurting anybody else. We don't consciously think I need to find that. We kind of emotionally feel like, okay, these people are uncomfortable around me. I need to find people that feel like it's a comfortable vibe to be around them. We don't necessarily think it through intellectually, particularly when we're younger. It just kind of happens. And, we know this in the extreme in terms of, I've worked with many criminals of different types. And, they would tell me, particularly people that were kind of predators, they would tell me they could walk into a room filled with people like a bar or some gathering of people, and they would intuitively know who the victims are in the room. They could just feel it and pick them out almost immediately, and they would be right. They were the people that were more vulnerable. And I think we do the same thing with other types of sin. We gravitate towards the people that will kind of buy in with us on whatever the sin is, whatever the selfishness is. And when we do that, we start building more and more of a worldview like, okay, well, this is our shared belief. Other people agree with me. This is truly how the world is. But, I had a detective friend who told me something funny I'll never forget. I was answering a lot of questions and helping him get educated for something he was investigating. And we became friends over time. And he was talking about the internet, and he said the thing he's observed about the internet is no matter how crazy you are, you can find 10 other people that agree with you. And you can end up in a very tiny corner of the internet, in an echo chamber of 10 other people that agree with whatever completely off-the-wall idea it is. But because you only listen to each other, you build this worldview that this truly is reality. And it seems like it because these 10 other people are your only social group, and they agree with you. And in the same way with sin, And, I've seen that in my life, and it's dangerous because if you then limit it to that, and it goes back to that objective truth we talked about before the break. The objective truth is Jesus and the rules for the Christian life, which are there to help us and keep us safe. They're not there to limit our enjoyment of life. And if we push aside the objective truth of Jesus and take the subjective truth of the humans that are justifying their sins, we're going to be in a funhouse world of distorted reality that's going to keep us trapped. And typically, I can tell you from working with people that are later in life, that have wallowed in sin and gone down that road all the way into criminal behavior and ended up in prison, they often wake up late in life and say something really went wrong. I now fully realize, like, I was way off the mark, but I thought all this was great. And sin is the same way. We can normalize it, and we need to subject ourselves in obedience to the objective truth of Jesus, and then humble ourselves to him and tell him where we're at and be honest about it and bring that prayer back into our life.
Wow, that was powerful, what you just shared. That was really good. What I love about the next right thing is we talk about these topics that we can all relate to, we can understand, we've had experience on some level with them, and it allows us to process this. It does it for me anyway, so I hope for our Morning Joy listeners it's doing the exact same thing. We can process it and try to apply it to our lives and start to make those necessary adjustments in how we conduct ourselves, how our disposition is, our outlook, our intention, all the things that make us authentic Christians. And Adam, tell me if you agree with this. I sometimes think we overcomplicate things. It's really quite simple. Get back to the basics. Start to adhere to how God set it up and work with God instead of against God. Because oftentimes I think we feel as though we have the right to do whatever we want, whenever we want, because we can just think it or do it, and we'll work out the mess later. It's so absurd because we know from stories through the centuries of people who have tried it on their own, and it never really goes well. So what do you say to that in these final comments? Because I think that sometimes when we're dealing with ourselves, we can be our own worst enemies. Sometimes everything is working against us. Just take those first steps, those proper steps towards God, and you'll see how it becomes easier, and you get stronger and more confident, and you hold your head up high, and you start to really walk the walk and talk the talk as a Christian. Final comments.
And here is where the value of the church giving us the saints comes in. So whatever your vice is, whatever you're having trouble overcoming, there's a saint who struggled with the same thing. And you can go find some saint that had a similar life to yours, a similar struggle, a similar sin that was dominating them. And by reading their life, you not only see their particular version of that human experience, but you get to see the rest of the story, their route back to God, and that they succeeded. You will see the encouragement of, oh, somebody else has been here and they made it out. And they made it to the point that we're confident they're in heaven. There's hope for me. And it's very concrete hope because somebody did it. It's not just somebody saying, well, in theory, if you do this, this'll be fixed. And get the biographies of the saints that are, the more in-depth and detailed, and get into the minutia of their lives. Maybe read a couple books, because you're going to see that they had the same similar flaws, foibles, weaknesses, struggles. But look at their route back to God, where their insight was, their aha moments were, and then look for those in your own life to come about. Ask Jesus to give you similar graces of conversion.